Apolo Ohno, you are the most decorated Winter Olympian in history. What did the night before a race look like for you?
Night before a big race, typically we would do some easy cardio between 15, 20, 30 minutes, spin on the bike, easy walk/jog, stretching. Dinner was pretty light, fish, maybe a brown rice pasta or a brown rice, a little bit of vegetable. Try to get 9 hours of sleep if possible. Always do the sauna the night before. So, 30, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, depending on how hot the sauna is. Finish with cold water, sleep deeply, wake up in the morning, kind of go through my morning routine, which is kind of breathing, reaffirmation of what the real goal was of that day, to stay strict to my routine. It wasn't really about the goal of winning, but that was the morning of. But the night before was just pretty simple. It was no stress, stay off my feet, rest, make sure I do the hot and cold therapy of some capacity. Almost always sauna. And if there was no sauna, I was literally sitting in someone's rental car with sweats, bundled up with the heat jacked on and in there for an hour sweating. And I've done that many times.
And this is 2002, 2006, and 2010. So 2002, long before social media was talking.
Started in 99.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
1999, long time ago.
So with this year, this is long before anyone was touting the benefits of a sauna online or touting the benefits of cold. And here you guys are. I imagine you weren't the only one doing this. After today's video, get a free box of 100% macadamia nut creamer. Literally the only ingredient is macadamia nuts in this stuff. So you add a little bit of this to your coffee, or you mix it with water and you reconstitute it into a macadamia nut milk. If you look at macadamia nut milks at the grocery store, it is disgusting the amount of things that they add into it. This is literally just macadamia nuts. And if you mix it with water, you've got macadamia nut milk. If you add it to coffee, you've got a creamer. So this is a free box of this stuff with any purchase from House of Macadamia. Plus, you're getting 20% off your entire order through House of Macadamia by using that link down below. So everything is sustainably grown and harvested in South Africa, less than an hour's drive from each other. But the bottom line is, this stuff is so inexpensive compared to other macadamia nut products. If you go to the store, especially if you go to Hawaii and you try to buy macadamia, you're looking ridiculous prices. Because these guys cut out the middleman, they are the literal House of Macadamias, getting you the best prices. So check them out, get your free box of macadamia nut creamer/milk, however you want to use it, and 20% off using that code and link down below in the description.
I was not the only one doing this. I got to say, the U.S. Olympic Training Center, there was a doctor there named Dr. Randy Wilbur, who was such a huge asset to all of the Olympic Training Center athletes. He wrote the sports science program that he was like the parent to everyone else. So if you were USA Wrestling, USA Track Cycling, USA Speed Skating, USA Swimming, he was kind of he had the oversight over everyone's mass training and program, your VO2 max testing, your body weight, your body composition, your blood panels. He saw everything, he and his team at the Sports Science. And so they were just a big proponent of not so much the heat shock therapy proteins that get released or using the sauna, but for sure using ice bath. Everybody that I knew in the training center was using the ice bath when I first got into the training center in 1997, 98, 99. And then I learned the sauna benefits, not the science benefits, but the physical feeling benefits from my father, who is Japanese, ancient Japanese tradition and culture, was a big believer in kind of cleansing the soul, cleansing the spirit every day using heat in the form of water. I fell in love with that process. And then living in the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, the Olympic Training Center hopeful and Olympic Training Center athletes who are wrestlers habitually use the sauna to cut weight. But they also just use a sauna every day. And I was the only, at the time, non-wrestling athlete tucked away in this corner, listening to all of these wrestling stories and learning about the wrestler's psyche around sport. And out of all the sports in the Olympic Training Center, the Greco-Roman and the freestyle wrestlers that were there, men and women, they had this sauna that no one else used. It was kind of near the weight room, but they had their own wrestling room, which was also attached. This is a long time ago, but they were the only ones in there, and I was the only non-athlete in there, or only non-wrestler that was in the sauna. And I just fell in love more with like the mentality around, we don't have to cut weight in speed skating, but these guys did. And so for me, it was like a little kid looking up to these like warrior-esque athletes. A lot of wrestlers, their physique is insane. These guys have like skin like saran wrap, just like kind of like you, like peeled over the muscle. But they were just tough and they were strong, and it went against all sports science recommendations, right? Like get super dehydrated, cut all this weight, no fuel, no salt, and then go wrestle another human being. I mean, that's literally sounds like hell, right? Like
it's horrible.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And they would still do it. And so that I wanted to tap into that psyche, that mentality that they had, and bring it over to my world of speed skating. And that's how I fell in love with the sauna. And then once you go along that path, you become very addicted to the feeling that you get. And obviously now we understand all these incredible health benefits associated with it. And the recovery aspect, which I did not know back then, I think gave me this ability to bounce back every single day, almost as if I was just like renewing my system. And so even my blood panels would express that I had a natural ability to rebound after extremely hard bouts of training. And I think I don't think it's that much genetic. I think a large part of that was using the sauna so much. My body just got so used to this like elastic, expansion and compression of training super hard, recovering, and then accelerating that recovery overnight, and then waking up and doing it all over again.
How did you sleep? Did you sleep well? I mean, your training demand was so high. I'd imagine. Yeah. I mean, when I train hard and my central nervous system is fried, it impacts my sleep negatively. I mean, did you experience that?
Yeah, later on in my career, the last, I would say, 2 Olympic Games, my sleep really started to take a hit. I don't know how much of that was associated with like anxiety and pressure and like the doom loop that exists psychologically of what could go wrong in a race, or this, like, I call it this like inner voice that is there that talks to you and says like, hey, I don't think maybe you have it anymore. You're getting a little bit too old. Maybe you're starting to get sick. Maybe your training wasn't accurate. Oh, this athlete looks better. There's just that voice inside. And I don't know how much of my poor sleep quality was associated with listening to this weird voice that was self-perpetuating, and how much of it was the central nervous system stuff. In the peak of my career, in the years that I felt the best, I was sleeping almost 8.5 to 10 hours a night. And like, I would wake up feeling incredible. So I was a lot younger.
Yeah.
Less scars, I call it, less mental scars. When you're young and you don't know the physiological or the psychological pain associated with losing, you kind of don't know what you don't know. So it's a beautiful thing. Like, you're this kid who's playing in this dangerous game until you get burned. Yeah. And then you're like, oh man, then boom, there's the scar. The scar is like, hey, don't do that again because you may get burned. And then there forms this like weird fortress protection mechanism. Mm-hmm. And I think the athletes who did really well in my sport were able to not operate in that dangerous sphere of almost carelessness and recklessness that you see a younger athlete, roll through, but also not be constrained by the scars that have been formed around their psyche later on in their career. It's this weird dance.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting, because it's almost as though, your beliefs craft so much of what you do, but also your recovery. And I think about my 6-year-old son, and he's, he can play hard all day, do whatever, and then just hit the pillow like a bag of rocks, right? And I often think about I feel bad knowing that he's eventually going to have these scars that affect him falling asleep, where he doesn't just hit the pillow and crash. And it's the same kind of thing. You're just a kid loving your sport. And then because you've got this prefrontal cortex, because you have executive function, you start building this repository of pain and heartache and despair and frustration and jealousy and this and that. And you're like creating this ecosystem in your brain that negatively impacts your sleep. Whereas when you're young, it's just love of the sport, like sincere love of the sport. And it makes you wonder, like, how much of this is true overtraining and age, or how much of it is just maturity and building that repository of negative self-talk in the brain that just happens with experience. That's so wild. So I mean, let's pivot over to belief for just a minute. I mean, when you talk about belief, you were doing this for so long. You had a pretty long career doing this. And you look in the world of like sort of this existential crisis that people have just maybe when they're in their, let's just say 40s, right? We always kind of joke what Tim Ferriss says, buy the red BMW, right? The bald guy in the red BMW. You already got medals. Like, what kept you going? Like, you've already reached the proverbial top. Like, why more? Like, what kept you going? And it's...
So thinking back, when I was in the moment, my answer to you would have been, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not thinking about what's really next. I'm doing what I'm really good at. I'm doing what I love, and there's more to do. Like I'm searching for this perfect race. I'm searching for this perfect Olympics, this perfect training session, this perfect technique. It's never good enough. And in the world of sport, that's an amazing psychological edge to have. But it's a never-ending cycle. And it can become very dangerous if you live a life like that, where you're kind of living your life looking forward only, and today is only preparing for what is to come in the future, which is absolutely a critical piece of preparation and going to do Olympic sports. But that's what I would have told you, was that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm 4 years, I just finished one Olympics, I'm going to the next Olympics. I have 4 years to prepare to be the best I can in a race that lasts 40 seconds long. And that journey begins today. Year 4, year 3, year 2, year 1, month 1, day 1, Olympics go, right? And then what I would say to you now looking back is I think that I had a deep belief that there was more to do, but it was really rooted by, like a part of it was, let's call it 50% of this is this like fear of failure that, I kind of looked to my father, and I was raised a single parent family, looking for that head nod of approval from dad, right? Which is a huge part of, I think, even my life today. So that transformed into, head nod of approval from coaches, from fans, from the media, from sponsors, from my team, from the arena that I'm competing in. And then there's the internal approval of kind of looking in the mirror when there's nobody else there. I don't have to wear the armor. I'm not wearing this like false sense of invincibility around my teammates or whatever. It's just me in my naked self, warts and all, right? Metaphorically speaking, and looking in the mirror and saying like, is this satisfactory to what you would define as being your best? Aside from anything else, like, do you really feel psychologically that this is everything that you could have accomplished? And most of the time I'd look in the mirror and say, no, like there's more to do. There's improvement here. And that's what keeps you going,
What would your dad have said at that same time?
I think my dad, right? My dad coming from Japan, Japanese immigrant, searching for the American dream, brought with him a philosophical belief of kind of consistently sharpening the mind, body, and soul on a daily basis. And knowing that perfection was impossible, but it doesn't detract away from his pursuit of seeking that perfection in whatever career path he was in. My dad cuts hair in Seattle, still to this day, 45 years, same location, same like customer base. Most of these people don't even have hair anymore, Thomas. Like they just sit down, he's just like massaging the scalp, Like this guy, he is like the Mr. Miyagi psychiatrist for the local community in Seattle, right? And what I realized with my father is he's not doing it for a career. He's doing it because it gives him a sense of purpose. And so I had a true sense of purpose in sport. I just felt like this is what the universe had placed me on earth for. Even if that was BS, I believed it at the time, and that was enough for me to continue on. And then there's the other aspect of just like, you love what you do. Like you become obsessed over something, and you start to care about the smallest incremental, minute things that really, don't matter. And not an almond more, not an almond less, we used to say back in the day, like in terms of like, nutritional consumption, right? Like just trying to measure every single inch and part. And It was a beautiful aspect of my life. One in which I don't think it's sustainable for all aspects. I don't want to take that psychology and apply it to my life today. I don't think it's, for me, it's not healthy. Some people, we talk about other folks that we see on social they're just different humans, right? They find what works for them. And for me, I just loved the sport, man. I loved it. I cared about it. I would win a world championships. I would, instead of going and partying with my teammates and the other athletes from around the world, I would rush back to my hotel room, pack my clothes, and then re-watch on my small little Sony, Micro 8 tape in my hotel room. I just won this competition. We don't compete again for like another 5 months. I should go relax. I could not break the cycle. I wanted to re-watch these, corners or this pass or this inconsistency from this athlete. It was always thinking about tomorrow. Yeah.
And when you come back, even fixated on the not an almond more, not an almond less. I like that. Just like this sheer obsession, right?
Yeah.
If we get granular, let's talk about your nutrition for just a minute, and then come right back to kind of the beliefs, because I know people that watch this channel probably hear that and they're like, "Oh, I want to hear about his nutrition. What did this guy eat?" I would imagine it was pretty granular and pretty detailed. I mean, you guys, even back 20 years ago, maybe we didn't know as much as we know now about nutrition, but clearly it was tailored, very specific. And what did it look like? What did a given off-season day look like as far as nutrition was concerned?
Okay. So I would have, I'll break it down. So there was a pre-workout and a post-workout and then meals. That's really it. Never used any electrolytes never used electrolytes now that I think about it. Never used salt. Just drank water. Didn't really understand electrolyte balance at all back then. So I'd wake up, I would have 1 egg, sometimes 2 eggs, a little bit of like sriracha or hot sauce. And then my pre-workout, maybe like an apple, like a couple slices of an apple for some glucose. And then my pre-workout, which was 30 minutes to an hour before I train. I used to make this mix. We used to call it this pre-workout mix. And I would take this Tupperware, it's about this big, okay? I'd fill about half with like organic oats, just like raw oats. Again, like I'd love to hear your perspective on this because I didn't know, again, this is me as like a young, like 20-something-year-old kid who doesn't know anything about nutrition. And so I'd make this, from my strength coach, he would tell me to make this Tupperware, first raw oats, dry, I would add some raw unsweetened applesauce, colostrum, powdered colostrum, coconut oil, a little bit of D-ribose, which I think is like this, almost like a sugar, and I would mix it up into this paste, and then I'd put it back in the refrigerator, let it harden, almost like it would just harden, and then I would take a spoonful or 2 spoonfuls of that, or 3 spoonfuls of that, depending on the activity that I was about to train for. So depending on the length, the intensity, is it lactic capacity? Is it strength endurance? Is it a 3-hour workout? Is it pure weight room? It would depend on the pre-workout. In the middle of the workout, I would have another egg with sriracha wrapped in lettuce, maybe a couple of slices of apple, again, depending on, some of our workouts were quite long. And then post-workout was a huge heaping tablespoon of this colostrum, and another egg, and then a break, and then my lunch would be usually it was a fish, small, maybe 6 to 8 ounces, and like a small vegetable. And then the pre-workout again for the next workout, train, post-workout was the same, was the colostrum and some water, and then dinner was basically lunch, and depending on the activity, I would incorporate like a brown rice pasta or something like that associated. And then I would have a snack of another egg for dinner with the sriracha, with the lettuce, and that was it.
So very little gluten. Like it sounds like you were kind of going like,
no,
you choose the brown rice pasta. I find that interesting.
It was no gluten, and actually in the years that we were really trying to watch the weight, I would try to eliminate the carbohydrate load as much as possible. The only carbohydrate load was the pre-workout, which was the oats, and then maybe the apples, the slices of apples. We'd always use green apples. I don't know why. And that's it. I mean, there was no, that was all I ate. There was no other variation of that. So sometimes we would use chicken thighs or chicken breast. I would have red meat maybe once every 2 weeks. Again, my whole focal point was to get as small and light as possible, but to create as much neuromuscular recruitment from the weight room and other training as possible as well. So that we did a ton of call it quiet, third workout, fourth workout of the day in the basement, doing sprints on a treadmill. And a lot of that, to be honest with you, thinking back, I went to sleep hungry a lot. So let me summarize that because there was a lot there. So wake up, 1 hard-boiled egg, hot sauce. Pre-workout was the mix, which was the raw oats, applesauce, colostrum, coconut oil, D-ribose, mix into a paste, put in the refrigerator a couple hours the night before, take it out, take 1 or 2 or 3 tablespoons, depending on the activity that I was about to do, go train. Halfway through the training session, which was usually on the ice, which was a 3.5 hour long workout, I would have maybe a couple slices of apples, 1 egg, and then post-workout was the 2 or 1 heaping tablespoon of colostrum, maybe a couple of apple slices, and then the lunch was a fish, vegetable, pre-workout again, before the workout. It's just rinse and repeat, same thing, every day, 7 days a week.
It's interesting because, the carbohydrate load for a guy that's training 2 to 4 times per day doesn't sound like much. And the fact that you're going to bed hungry, it's interesting because, there's this pretty interesting, paradoxical sort of viewpoints that people have. And a lot of it is, you should be fueling yourself as much as possible and have as much energy as possible and yada, yada. However, a number of high performing athletes that I talk to, and specifically in the MMA world, which, I talk to a lot of those guys, including GSP, and they all live on very few calories and they train on very few calories. And they don't do it for any longevity benefit or any specific health benefit other than the fact that they feel they have better adaptation. GSP is a huge faster, right? He trains fasted. He does so much of his training fasted. He does 1 meal a day a lot of times. And it's interesting to hear that you guys, or you specifically, would eat in such probably.
It was just me. My teammates were not like that.
You were probably in a deficit, and yet you didn't. Yet you were training at literally the highest possible level, literally the best in the world. And it just kind of seems to throw a little bit of sand in the face of a conventional way of thinking that, you have to constantly eat more. And the rule that I'm getting here is just every single person is different, right? And it comes right back to this belief system. As someone that's done a lot of pretty serious fasted feats and fasted endeavors, doing things insane mileage when I'm fasted, and it does a lot of times come down to this. Doesn't mean, and just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's optimal, as Brad Kearns would say, but your optimal might be different than someone else's optimal. And the reason that I think this ties back to the belief is we were talking a little bit before we were recording about you having this 6th gear, which I definitely want to have you say for the camera. But I think that with nutrition, did you ever even miss certain foods, or were you just so focused that it was purely fuel and it didn't even matter? Or was there any inkling to be like, man, I want some pizza, or just not even exist in your brain?
Yeah, I had many times where I wanted to eat all kinds of food. My roommate and training partner and my strength coach lived with me in Utah for the last 4 years of my career. I wanted to recreate the training, the boxing training camp that they go to and they disappear for 3 or 4 months before a big fight. I wanted to recreate that for 4 years. It made sense to me. And as a part of that, everything was monitored. Every ingredient in the house was monitored. Every meal was monitored. Every hour of sleep was monitored and tracked. The belief system and the nutrition, all this comes down to, I missed pizza because they would order pizza every Sunday. My strength coach and my roommate, right? The guy who was living in my training, which was brutal. But it was just pure fuel. At some point, I had developed this idea in my head that the 2 words I wanted to tell myself when I got to the games was, I want to have 0 regrets about my preparation. And in a sport where you win and lose by 1,000th of a second, which is that difference, right? It seems, imagine you go to the games and you don't medal by just a couple thousandths of a second, you will wonder for the rest of your life how many days that you didn't train appropriately, you screwed off, you were partying, you didn't eat. All these things come into your view. And so what I didn't want to have is I didn't want to have those, well, what if? I wanted to lose or win and be able to say the same thing. This was my best. Today was all that I had. And maybe the training program was a little bit off, that's okay. But if it was a lack of discipline and consistency, that's on me. And I have to eat that for the rest of my life. And that to me was a huge scar I wasn't willing to go through. And that's why I showed up to the ice rink psychotically intense every single day. Like if you talk to my teammates, they would just tell you that I was not the most approachable person on the team. Every day it was almost like this self-fulfilling little bit of anger, not towards my teammates, but internally, that it wasn't good enough. And I was unhappy with that lap or that time or the way that I felt, or why am I not recovering better? Why is my body type not like that athlete's, right? And all those things. And so these are all becoming fuel for metabolizing to progress. And
interesting.
Yeah. So I missed it. I mean, dude, when I first went to the training center when I was 14 years old, we would go on these long runs as a team in the afternoon. We used to run around this thing called Mirror Lake. And I was a terrible runner. So I'd be at the back of the pack with my friend Eric, and we would wait till we couldn't see the pack anymore. We would leave the training center, run around, it's like an hour run. And about 15 minutes of the run, we would run by a Pizza Hut. We would just duck into the Pizza Hut and we would eat a pizza and then jump on the back of them on the way home. That didn't last very long when I got the body comp results back and I was like really embarrassed, right? So yeah, I mean, I love food. Like, I eat today, basically not whatever I want, but I live to eat in a different perspective because I spent so many years of my life not living like that. And I had to work with nutritionists, right? We talk about this like training in a caloric deficit and understanding what was happening. I mean, I liked the feeling of being empty going into a hard workout. I was just able to train harder and more intense. And I had tried the kind of pro cycling approach of like eating pasta and carbohydrate loading. And dude, I just got fat and I gained weight and I felt sluggish and I was always tired. And I couldn't, the nutritionist who described that, 25% of our team thrived on that diet. And I was just like, something can't work here. I'm heavier than I've ever been. And I build lactate like this on the ice, like something's not working. So I had to do something that was extreme and different. Whether it makes sense from a sports science perspective, I don't even know. All I know is it felt like I was fasted every day.
Yeah.
It felt light, I felt strong, I felt sharp. And because when you act in a deficit for so long, it's almost, I feel like we didn't measure like nutritional ketosis, but I would imagine I was probably very close to being cyclical keto because I would burn through that glucose so fast and I was always in a deficit, especially in the days where we didn't fuel with carbohydrate. I bet you my millimolar was like, it was high.
I would almost guarantee it. I mean, especially with your training level. And that's what's kind of interesting when you look at like ketones as a signaling device for adaptation. People think, oh, ketosis, okay, that means that like I'm depriving myself of carbohydrates and that's just this fad diet kind of thing. It's like any pro athlete that's training in a specific fashion is flirting with ketosis all the time. And they're getting the cellular adaptation that's happening from not just ketosis, but also massive AMPK phosphorylation. Basically like thinking of it as a dimmer switch where you're like, the more you turn the dimmer to the left, the bigger the deficit you're in. And you can crank it all the way down and you're gonna be in a really extreme deficit. It's just like training with a weight vest. I use this analogy all the time. It's like, it's a nutritional weight vest. It's like sometimes it makes it more difficult, but as long as your RPE scale is appropriate, then you rise to the occasion and it all comes out in the wash.
What's RPE?
Your rating of perceived exertion, right? Which is a very arbitrary, like subjective thing to look at because a coach isn't gonna settle for that typically. But coach, I gave it my best. I was a 9. Were you? I gave it a 9. I gave it a 10. But then when you start toying with your nutrition more, and you find what works for you, and you find your groove, and you find that your 9 Tuesday fasted, and your 9 Thursday are 0.3 of a second different. And you're like, well, shit, I'm doing something right? So it all comes down to the individual, but also for certain people, being a little bit hungry just gives you that adrenaline of like drive, right? Like when you are in a fasted state, you have so much of that norepinephrine that's already circulating just as a result of just being fasted. It's like you're fundamentally, if I can be very colloquial here, you're like looking for food, right? Like you're probably a little bit hungry. It's probably tapping you into that state where like, I'm looking for food.
You're very alert.
Yeah, very alert.
Yeah.
And as far as a survival mechanism is concerned, I would imagine it's like turning everything on up here. And whether you want to call that bro science or not, you can't deny how it makes you feel. You know, I can't tell you every single thing that's going on biochemically, but I feel like a mediocre dog turd if I'm like eating before a workout. Like I just feel like I can get it done, but it's schlepping through it. Whereas like in the morning fasted, I'm like alert, I'm focused. And it sounds like the small amounts of fuel that you were consuming, what you found to be optimal. I love your strength coach, by the way. He sounds like my cup of tea, like all the way down to the D-ribose and stuff. Like he was ahead of his time.
He was ahead of his time. I mean, even his training, just his training he was 20, 30 years ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, his nutritional, belief system, his recovery belief system, his, his belief around the Krebs cycle, like all these things, nobody was talking about this stuff.
Did people call him crazy?
No one believed him. But the athletes, and people called him crazy. And every athlete who went to go train with him, I would say, thought that they trained hard until they trained with him. And he just takes the intensity level to here. He understands biomechanics very well. So he watches, when you're doing in the weight room, I mean, the load that he wants, whether it's, overload training, whatever he's doing, he's monitoring every angle of your knee. He's just seeing everything. He's got so much experience in watching this that the risk of injury is significantly decreased because he's watching how you're actually lifting. So, I mean, I've seen stuff that people don't believe when like an NFL athlete walks in his door, is a certain body weight, can do a certain amount of, weight in the squat rack or the leg press or the deadlift or the pull. And then literally 4 weeks later, it's like I'm talking about 50% increases in strength, just like weird stuff. And I'm like, no, test or anything going on. There's nothing. There's like pure adaptation to training. And again, extreme, doesn't work for everybody, right? But I bought into it, and I think that was 80% of it, that I believe that no one else is willing to go to the depths of this type of psychotic training and load and volume and intensity day after day for years. And therefore that would harden me and my spirit. So when I got to the starting line, I felt satisfied because I had inner confidence that no one else went through the same pain threshold that long, that consistently, for that duration, for the whole year or 2 or 3 or 4. And that was my inner drive and confidence.
Would you say that at that level, there's a good degree of bro science? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, bro science belief. I mean, we talk about like the 6th gear, when I was younger in the sport, I would look at the South Korean skaters, the Chinese, the Russians, and we would, what happens in speed skating is you go to a World Cup. So you would arrive on a Sunday, and then you don't compete until the following Friday. So you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to get used to the climate, the ice conditions, the time zone. And the entire time you're going to the ice rink and you're training. So you see who's training before you and then after you, right? And you would watch the other athletes. And many times we would see these other athletes from around the world perform and hit these lap times, world record lap times in training the week leading up to the competition. And in my brain, I had somehow convinced myself that whatever they did on the ice simply didn't matter because they were never going to do that on race day. This was in practice. Practice is a different thing. Race days where only counts. And that I had a 6th gear when everyone else was capped at 5. Even though I didn't have there's like no science behind this. It's like literally a belief that because I was American, I had a 6th gear, and that allowed me to do things that were not sports science related. I could break through the glass ceiling. And call it bro science or not, but the human belief and conviction is so powerful. It worked many times.
That's what when you call things bro science, it's like sometimes, you'll see people say things about someone's reason for doing something, and they're not even calling calling out the scientific literature. They're just saying, well, this works, and it works for me possibly because X, Y, Z. And I always laugh when people say bro science is this bad thing, and I'm like, I mean, your N of one is your N of one. Like that is your anecdotal experience is all that matters. And if you have this that works for you, and we talked about this a little bit before, but it's so important because it sounds like your strength coach was willing to look at the true data that was in front of him and possibly even mechanistic research that hadn't been portrayed in observational settings yet. In other words, like if you're looking at observational research, that's great. If you're looking at all research, that's great. If you're looking at all evidence, that's great. But evidence is evidence. It's called evidence because it's what you find after the fact. And a lot of times, that is far too long for someone that's an elite performer to wait for that stuff to come out. I can't wait 3 years or 5 years for scientific literature to confirm what I think is working right now. So I'm going to continue to do what I think is working right now, even if it flies in the face of other people. And even if they think I'm crazy, even if they think it doesn't work, even if they think that it's total baloney, you know what? In 5 years, we'll talk. Maybe the research has, matched back up. And it takes those front runners that have the confidence to like step in front of the mainstream, step in front of that and say like, no, this is what works for me. And virtually every single elite performer that I've ever met and working with tier 1 operators in the US Special Forces, same kind of thing. Look, you know what? There's a smidge of data that suggests this might work. Is it gonna harm me if I do try it? No. Then why the heck would I not? And even if it's a placebo effect and you get that 1,000th of a second, right? You mentioned this sixth gear and like you even being younger and imagining, hey, I've got a sixth gear so I can do better. Did your pride of sort of being an American at that state like drive a lot of your performance? I mean, it's like I remember being in high school and watching you, and there was such like American pride for the Olympics. Like there was just such like Americans can do it better. Americans will push it harder. Americans will go the extra mile. And that was just like drilled into our life. And like you fueled me so much as a track athlete and as a cross country runner, just like watching you and your belief and how hard you would push it. Like, is that a big driver for, other American Olympians? Like did American spirit like really drive a lot of that?
It did back then.
Yeah.
It was a different time. We didn't have distractions of social media. Yeah. It's all that we did. When we trained, we were very present. Our access to information was limited to what we can get on the internet. But it was also, I'll just take it back. So my first Olympic Games was in 2002. I had failed to make the 1998 Olympic Games, which was held in Nagano, Japan. So 4 years had gone by and my first games was in Salt Lake City. It was, arguably 6 months post 9/11. So very sensitive time for the country. A lot of people were questioning whether we should have the Olympic Games on home soil, whether the US was even safe, whether people should travel anymore. Lots of weird stuff happening in the country. And there was this like vibrance of uncertainty and volatility that existed in the air during the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake came out of the gates, so many volunteers from that state said, we're willing to do whatever it takes to host the best Olympic Games possible. Our way, our American way, whatever that way means. And as we walk into the opening ceremonies, I tell this story because this was the light bulb moment for me. As we walk into the opening ceremonies and there's this huge arena, there was like special forces people around on top of buildings with their night vision goggles, and people were waving, they were waving to us as the US contingent was walking into the arena. And as we walk in, the crowd of reps goes crazy, goes wild. And I'm with my teammates and other Winter Olympic athletes that I had known throughout the years. It was a pride moment. And then as we got seated, and they brought in this tattered flag that was flown during the attacks at the World Trade Centers in New York. And some of my teammates were a part of that ceremony where they brought the flag in and everyone kind of had this moment of silence. It was very quiet in the arena. It was cold, right? You could see your breath because in the middle of winter, it was February in 2002. And there was this like wind that came and it kind of, made this great gust and the flag was waving. It was like this, very picturesque storytell moment for a lot of folks. And I think it was at that moment at least for me, that I realized that, this whole time that I've been preparing for these Olympic Games, it was all about me. It was all about Apolo. Very selfish, right? All about me. And finally I realized that it was so much bigger. This represented many families in this country's pride about how we would go and compete. Not in terms of how the results were, although those were important to us. It was about how we faced failure. What did we say on camera? They're watching with their family, with their kids, hoping and yearning that when someone did win, there was some source of inspiration, and that person was from their hometown or gave something that said, yes, like I can do it too. Or when someone failed, they spoke in a certain way that they could look to their son or their daughter and say, see, that's what happens when you fall down or you don't get what you want. And that to me is what the Olympic Games was all about. And it was in that moment that I realized that. And in my first race, I didn't win gold. I won silver. And I had said many times to many folks, I said, I didn't lose the silver. I didn't lose the gold. I won this. This was my medal. And I want to celebrate as if I won gold. And I think for a lot of people, we can resonate with preparing a lifetime for something or going through your life, believing and having this destiny that you are supposed to have a certain life, supposed to have a certain result. And then boom, life smacks you down and you go crashing into the pads. And in that moment, you have a choice. You have a choice of whether you allow whatever this is, whether it's some debilitating disease or accident or financial failure or divorce, whatever it might be. You have a choice of whether to stay down or to get back up. And for me, I got back up, right? I had this instinct to get back up, throw my skates across the finish line. I was able to win a medal. It wasn't the color that I originally intended it to be. I could have lived the rest of my life stewed in this soup of bitterness, saying I'm the victim, that person stole the medal for me and I'm deserving of this. Or I could take it for what it is and surrender to that outcome, because it is there. There's no asterisk next to my name in the Olympic, record book. It just says the result. I have to accept that. And I can tell myself my own story. And that race was the most important race of my career, even though the color was not intended. I wanted to have gold. And I think that's why people watched the Olympic Games back then. That's why it was so important back then. That was why I had this sense of this sixth gear, of this pride of being American, of just representation. And I take that lesson with me today, right? It's not like my life today is peaches and cream. I have lots of losses and failures and good decisions and bad decisions. And I think I look back to that as saying, I can't control the outcome in every instance. I can prepare the best as possible. If I don't get the outcome or result that I want, what's my choice? Do I stay down? Or do I get back up and I just inch by inch keep moving forward, brick by brick? And choosing that choice is always the best choice, no matter what. You cannot control the circumstances of this universe. You just can't. You can hopefully create, better, ways in which you can shape it. But at the end of the day, whether you get what you want is not entirely, it may not be your deck of cards, and you have to live with that.
Would you say that you had a different vantage point on your training, your nutrition, everything after you had sort of that aha moment? I mean, you think about yourself as a kid. I think about myself as a high school athlete, and I think back it was all about me. It was just there wasn't the world weighing down on you. And then I think about myself now. I'm not a professional athlete, but I think about how I look at even my training and the vantage point that I have and how I look at things. Sometimes I have more energy because I funnel it in from thinking about my kids, thinking about they look up to me and things. So when you have this aha moment and you realize all the hope that you bring forward for people, you realize wait a minute, this isn't just about Apolo. This is about what I represent. Did that change your training? Did it change how you looked at going about things?
I mean, at the 2002 Olympic Games, it was too late. I couldn't change the training. The only thing that changed was how I represented. But moving forward, it was a huge part of that, right? I mean, I always say purpose is this beautiful thing. It will pull you far better than you feel like when you need to be pushed. It's uncontrollable. It just drags you forward when you have purpose. For many people, it's kids, right? It's their family. It's their loved ones. So whatever you feel internally it's cast aside You're willing to move forward because of whatever you identified as your purpose, right? Viktor Frankl talks about that a lot, right? Is like you basically, you want to end suffering is when you find your purpose, right? Because it enables you to continue to move on. I used to read this book by this Greek philosopher. His name was Nikos Kazantzakis. And he had this excerpt in this, it was called Report to Greco. And he had this open communication and dialogue. And he says, he's communicating, I think, with himself / with God. And he's saying, do not ask whether you will win or lose. That is not your account. God reckons that you carry the struggle further. That is effectively what you can control, is you just continuously push to carry the struggle further. And that's really powerful, right? If you can make that an integral part of your life, whatever it may be, your job that you despise, the thing that you are doing, the pain that you are feeling, it allows you to just carry that weight like Sisyphus, and you just keep pushing that boulder up. You come back down, and you just push it back up again. That's really powerful. And everybody needs something there, something to identify with what that is. And I would bet 30% of Americans don't have it. They haven't yet identified it. It's not their fault. They haven't tasted it yet. They don't know. And when they do, everything changes, because your ability to get distracted, you just remove the stuff that no longer matters. And I think that's a really beautiful space to be in. You're not rude, you're like this is, I have a limited amount of time on this planet, 86,400 seconds per day. I choose to not spend X amount of those on things that doesn't craft this world that I'm seeking to improve, right? And it's much easier said than done, but
yeah.
A
wise mentor of mine once told me that you will go much further saying no to things than you will saying yes. And it was the same purpose. It wasn't a matter of saying no to things that are difficult. It was a matter of saying no to the noise, focusing on your craft, and by process of elimination, like sometimes you find your purpose, right? Like if you take today, for example, how much distraction do we have? Tons, right? Constant distraction. That's eliminating our ability to ever find our purpose, because we're constantly distracted. We're being robbed of finding purpose. And we have to artificially find purpose sometimes, or we pretend that we have purpose. And it's not exactly what's truly driving us, because that authentic purpose is much different than a manufactured purpose. Oh, well, it's my purpose. Well, what's your purpose? Oh, well, I just want to help others. Okay, I get that. But like, what is your purpose? How do you contribute? How do you help others? Like, what is, and the way you describe it, it just pulls you, right? You can't stop it. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. And it's a very powerful thing. And when something like that is such a purpose, I want to ask you, like, how did you handle it when you had to realize, like, it's time to retire, it's time to be done? Because to this day, candidly, like, you just smoked a pretty brutal workout. You clearly have the gusto. You clearly still go. Nothing has changed up here. Like, what ran through your head? I mean, it had to have been, was it a tough day to realize, hey, I got to be done? Like, coming to terms with, like, hey, am I getting too old to do another games? Or like, what ran through your head? What did it feel like?
In my final Olympic Games, a year and a half before, so this was 2008, I was climbing some mountains in Colorado doing some of my own internal training. And I remember basically confirming this was going to be my final Olympics. I hadn't told anybody that. I felt like, this is it. This is the final games, and then you must move on. So for me, it was by choice. Very lucky. Many athletes don't retire on their own terms. They're injured, they age out, something happens, they're forced and they no longer can make the team, whatever it might be. I could have made 2014, and I for sure could have, albeit no injury, could have made the 2018 Olympic team for the US. I'm 100% confident in that. I decided to retire, and when you say, what was that reinvention like of the new identity to find the new purpose? Man, it was brutal. I write about it in this book, right? I talk about the great divorce, right? I think every athlete goes through this period of time where their sole purpose, their identity has been married to this person as Apolo Ohno, this short track speed skater, right? Like, In every interview that I do, every conversation is like, oh, the most decorated Winter Olympic athlete of all time, right? But believe me, I am so grateful for that. Like, but there's also the other side of that coin is like, hey, like, is that all who you are? Because I crafted this personality, this person, this brand, this psyche around who that was. And so it took me about 1.5 years, 2 years until it really crept in. And the conversation was, all right, dude, what else are you actually good at? Like, you can't just wear spandex and go in circles your whole life. Like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? Like, really, like, I'm not sure how much relevancy this has to the world at all. Like, let's be real, right? I had to have that like real conversation. It's like, dude, like, you're not that important. Like, let's just be honest. And that was pretty brutal, right? Because the world had, you know, I don't say this as an excuse, but like the world had just basically given me this like stuff, like, oh, you know, great brand sponsorships and everything is easy. And then it started to become very real that this was not sustainable and this was not going to continue. And then something else switched on in my head that said, well, I want to be competitive in the next phase of my life. I don't know what that means. And so I just said yes to everything. Every travel, every business, every opportunity. And I traveled all over the world and I saw everything you can imagine, 70 plus countries, to do all different types of business. Manufacturing, infrastructure, real estate, software. I mean, I touched every fabric just trying to learn because I was a baby. You know, I was a 25 plus year old kid, 27, 28-year-old kid, but I was like an 18-year-old. I wasn't 29, I wasn't 30. I was 18 years old who had no idea what the world, or how the world worked or how business was or anything. All I knew was speed skating. And it became a harsh reality check to find that personal board of directors or mentorship, surround myself with the right people, which was very hard. I say this fully and bluntly and transparently. It was very difficult finding people who were real, who I felt like had my back and didn't have an angle or an edge to take advantage of. I didn't see it, I was clouded, right? I didn't have experience in reading what that was. I could read people's behavior in terms of sport, but I couldn't read between the poker face of how the world worked in other aspects. And that was a whole new wake-up clause. So the way that I identified with what was gonna come next was, what do I really wanna do? What is really important to me? And how do I gain more experience in this world? And a lot of my blessed success and failure came from me saying yes. Now in my 40s, just like you said, the powerful word of saying no really gives me time to do the things that I identify as being the most important for this period of my life. And I think people talk about that. Like 30s, you're starting to get your groove and you're figuring yourself out. 40s, typically you identify with what you feel you understand the most about yourself. And then 50s, you're like, I know myself. 60s, you're like, man, I wish I can go back to my 20s, you know? So I'm in that stage now where, you know, I kind of blend, we talked a little bit about the three quadrants, or, you know, the thirds of where I spend my time, one third. And it really just comes down to those experiences that I had. And I realized this book particularly was like this thick before, and we cut it down to make it much easier read, was really because I had been catching back up with a lot of my Olympic friends, my brothers and sisters. And I noticed this reoccurring theme where only like 2 out of 20 had reached a level of what I would consider to be success. And success was not pure financial. It was a blend of career accomplishment mixed with where they were growing and where they were at with their life. I could hear it in the tone of their voice, right? It was almost like this calmness, this confidence, but also this like sense of urgency, not to rush, but that they started to find their groove. And then the other 80+% of the athletes, I could hear the tone was a little bit lower. They felt a little bit lost, like they were disappearing. They didn't have importance. They missed the sport because that's what they felt gave them purpose in life. They were really good at something. And now they're no longer good at something. They're actually less than at something. And that is debilitating over time, right? We all need to feel confident about something, some skill, something that we feel we do better than other people at. And that's really important. And then when you don't have that and you keep losing, so to speak, or you keep failing time after time, you start to question, man, maybe I'm not supposed to do anything after sport. Maybe that peak of my life was all that I was destined to do. And replace sport with any career. right? Whatever people are doing. I think that's a natural frame of mind to go into. And you get back to that choice. You can either accept that, I'm not supposed to do anything. I'm just going to go through the motions. And I guarantee you the next 10 years are going to go by and you're going to be in the same spot wondering what just happened, versus saying, I choose not to succumb to that inner voice. I choose a different path. Regardless of whether we end up in the same place, I'm going to choose a different path. I just believe if you choose this other path, you'll never end up in the same place. You'll end up somewhere else that is far more rewarding than what we can understand today, if you project out 5 years, 10 years from today.
And there's a season for everything too. That's something that's difficult for people to understand when they're young. And I've kind of had to accept that as well. Certain things, I can speak to the sacrifice, for lack of a better term, of having children, right? Like things change. You sacrifice a lot of yourself for that. And it's the most amazing thing in the world, what you gain. But you can't help but still wonder, like, oh man, I had to draw the curtain on this aspect of my life. And that can be really difficult at times. And it's like, it's almost a great divorce in a lot of ways with your previous identity, right? But when you realize that the common denominators of what makes you as a true person and your moral compass, that's never changed. And I think if people can still remain married to their moral compass and understand that it's their drive, their willingness to help others, their willingness to take care of themselves, their, XYZ, fill in the blank. As long as you can keep that on hand, then replace whatever you want with whatever you want to do and whatever feels like it gives you purpose. And you're going to be fine. And it's like you see with athletes, especially, it's a coping mechanism in many ways, right? Like you look at professional athletes, I'll use, again, special forces operators because I'm very familiar with that. When they get out of, being a tier 1 operator, they drop down into a different special forces unit or they get out altogether. Talk about a complete mind screw, right? Because they have the same thing. They've been an elite military professional for however long. They've worked their entire life going through selection, going through OTC, and getting into where they need to be. And then whatever training continues on beyond that, they are the quintessential American badass. And then suddenly they're not. And their entire identity is wrapped up in that, but it's also a lot of times been a coping mechanism for them. And you think about, like, for professional athletes and for elite military, a lot of times those guys and gals get into that because, I can speak for the military, they didn't know what else, but they knew that they had gusto and they knew that they had grit, right? And this was the one thing that might have given them the satisfaction that they needed in life that they didn't get from other areas. So in a lot of ways, being that all-American badass was a true coping mechanism that helped them get through life. And when that's removed, that's already psychologically difficult. Not to mention, you've had the government taking care of you and doing things for you so that you can just be the best that you can be. And then all of a sudden, hey, figure it out.
I call them the guardrails. The guardrails go flat.
Yes.
There's no more rules to keep you centered on this path. You just flat. You got to make your own again.
I was thinking about like bowling. You can put the bumpers up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you're mid-roll, and it's okay. It's going to hit the bumper. Then no, sorry, never mind.
Yeah.
And with athletes, I mean, almost all of them that I talk to feel the same way. And partially is manufactured in a way, like you've been doing it for so long, this becomes how you cope. But a lot of athletes actually just get into that because they're introverted, private people, maybe weren't the most social people, and this is where they found confidence, especially with individual sports, running, speed skating, things like that, right? Team sports might be a little different, but individual sports, it's like, this is me, this is how I cope, it's how I deal. So not only did your identity leave, but your therapy left. And that's a very difficult thing to really wrap your head around.
Yeah, if I can make any comments on that, I think every athlete, servicemen, servicewomen, anyone who's changing career or having kind of a life crisis or identity change, physical activity and training is your best friend. You want to change the way that your brain works about stuff, you do it through movement first. It's the fastest route to change that I know of. And it's instantaneous. You want to create strength and more discipline and all these things that you need to have to change in the next scope of what's happening. Don't lose that. And it's the biggest mistake I see a lot of my friends who have retired is they say, well, I'm not training anymore. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm like, no. This is actually what's going to keep you sane and keep you on that guardrail path, right? The guardrails are going to be there for you. And then the second part is, don't lose the ego entirely. I think the ego can be constructed and used in very powerful ways if you can use it as a lever, but also you need to pour that cup out, right? Like you need to open this with a pure beginner's mind. And yeah, you're probably going to be 5, sometimes 10 years older than what your peer is. You need to just remove all that noise because it's going to stop you from learning. Go into this. If you're 28 and you're retiring, if you're 30, if you're 58, just go into this and just say, I'm going in this with an openness to learn as much as possible, right? And you quiet the noise, you create these blinders in that moment that allows you to absorb in a much more effective way. And I think that's where real change happens. And then just repetition, man. Just like, if you don't feel good today, okay, it's all right, keep going. Tomorrow you may feel different. You don't feel good tomorrow? Okay, well, this is fine. Let's do it again tomorrow. And then eventually something's gonna change, right? But if you're seeking like, I need to feel good, I need to feel this every day, it's just, life is, like you said, it's a cycle, right? It comes like this, and you ride them when they come. Those days when you feel amazing, you better just enjoy that moment, because you know those days that suck, that's when you can say, it's okay, it sucks right now. This too shall pass. Right? Just like training.
When I was on that Echo bike, literally was
You were hammering that.
Just thinking that last one is, this, I always tell myself, this is what it feels like right now. And that's an old from a book called Mastery. That was just it was just a meditation book. And it was just something like,
Mastery.
The more that you can think about just, this is what it feels like.
Is that John Kabat-Zinn? Maybe.
Shoot, I don't even know who wrote it. It was probably 10, 11 years ago that I read it. It was the first meditation book I ever read. And this is what it feels like right now. And it's, you hear coming into the present, this and that, sure, but that kind of went in one ear and out the other for me. But like, that is a mantra that like when things get hard, I'm on a long run, I'm heading up a hill. This is what it feels like right now. This is what my quads feel like. This is what my calves feel like. This is what my body feels like. This is what my lungs feel like. This is what it feels like right now. Not a half a second from now, not a nanosecond from now, not 1 second from now, definitely not 5 minutes from now. Right this flipping second, right this instant. It's amazing what you can push through physically with that. Harder to do mentally, but it's amazing when you really put that all together.
The only easy day was yesterday.
And with, I'll echo what you said about, movement. And I feel like I tell a lot of people that obsession isn't always a bad thing when it's harnessed as focus. When it's freelance obsession, it's a different story. But getting obsessed with something sometimes is a gateway to other things. And I tell people, if there's one thing that you want to get obsessed with, it's going to be like your movement, your exercise. For certain people, getting obsessed with nutrition is healthy. For other people, it can be dangerous. You don't want to get orthorexic and obsessed. But I think being focused, and I find that like harnessing that discipline in nutrition and being able to say, hey, like I don't care what kind of diet someone's going to do. I don't care. Paleo, keto, vegan, it really doesn't matter to me. Like we can poke holes and find peaks in every single one. But having that focus and that discipline, that is like a transferable discipline that goes into other areas of your life. It's like you notice that when you start focusing on your diet and you focus on that, there's all the benefits that you might get from the food, yada, yada, but more so the benefit of that methodical practice of being focused with your food directly translated into the discipline that you put into other areas of your life, whether it's training, whether it's your kids, whether it's your business. When my diet starts to slip in a way that I don't like it, everything else kind of fizzles and fragments. And so for me, it's like, and the same would be said about exercise. However, like exercise.
I smiled because I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's so important for people. And it's so difficult because there's an education barrier. So to get focused on your nutrition comes with work. It's not like with movement, fortunately, everyone can just get out and start walking today. Like everyone can get out and start exercising, doing something. Nutrition, everyone can make a change, but there's all these barriers to entry that make it difficult for people, but it can be done, and it's amazing what it does to the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So, well, man, where can everyone find you?
I mean, I'm on social. I'm probably not as active as I should be, but I'm there. I'm there. I love health and fitness. It's been a huge part of my life since I've retired. It's kept me sane. It's helped me manage the internal voice that tells me I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm never enough. And it keeps me, straight and narrow. which is, I think, really important. So, I love channels like yours that talk about all the fun nutrition and supplements and studies and training. This stuff is a part of, I think, the human experience today. And for people who are able-bodied, right? Obviously, some people have horrible injuries or in circumstances they can't move as much as you and I, but for a lot of people, and the majority of people who I'm sure who are watching and listening, my only final departing stuff is just don't take for granted this incredible gift of life that's been given. And if you haven't found your purpose, that's okay. You will, right? But create the life that you really desire, even if it's in the smallest increments. That can be through the way that you talk to yourself, your commute to work, the training that you do, the food that you eat, being present. These things are sacred and cherished, right? And slow time down, don't speed it up. Yeah, I mean, his whole thing, on this training program that I had, John used to write at the beginning of every season. He would personally write on this training program. And it was these kind of belief systems that we then would put onto a yellow sticky note and paste them around the house, and also in my training bag, in my skate, in my helmet. It was things like the body weight and the target that I was targeting to be. And it was things like 0 regrets, and it was things like one world, one life, one chance, your choice. And just these mantras around whatever you believe to be true or not, either way, you are right? Things like that. And so, he would have this talk with me before, the Olympic season began. And it was like a scene out of Rocky, out of like Rocky 4. He was sitting down, he's like, look, you're gonna be hungry. There's gonna be times when you beg for food and I'm not gonna give it to you. There's a reason why. There's gonna be time when I ask you for more, for another repetition, for another 10 seconds on the bike, on the treadmill, and you're gonna look at me and tell me you don't have any more to give. There's gonna be times when you're gonna question everything that we are doing, because in that moment, you feel the pain at the highest level of intensity, and it's tricking you into going back to your normalcy, back to your comfort zone, back to what you know, back to your, quote, blueprint for success. But you told me that you desire to break free from that. You needed to reinvent, you needed to break free from this previous belief system in order to fully exhaust every avenue of you saying and looking in the mirror of I did my best. And therefore it is going to require you to reconfigure how you think about training, how you think about the mindset. And he's basically reminding me, this is what your goal is. Excuse me. This is what your goal is. This is what is going to take for you to get there. Excuse me.
You can redo that whole sentence if you
Yeah. So he would say, this is what your goal is today, and this is what it is going to take for you to get there, and you are going to question this. And I share this because everyone who seeks a change, who seeks some, audacious goal, it's very sexy to make a goal of becoming an Olympic champion. Everybody on the team wanted to make wanted to make the Olympic team. Every national team member wanted to make the Olympic team. Every Olympic team member wanted to go and win a medal. That was the goal for everybody, had that. But the consistency of getting there, because many times along that chosen path that you have determined for yourself, your subconscious is gonna say, hey, come back over here where it's comfortable, where it's warm, where it's not dangerous, where your feelings aren't gonna get hurt, where you're not gonna look stupid, right? Come back over here. Do what you do because this is the way. But what we know is that that is not the way. The way is going against the grain, is challenging the status quo, is challenging yourself. And that's what, that was the bond that we had formed. And so when we did the training, it was all about tiptoeing on that line of basically cracking mentally and not, and finding that point, right, of basically failure and dancing between really overtraining and not. And I was probably overtrained my most of my life, but psychologically, I went to the start line with the belief that I could and I had the chance to win every race, even if I didn't. I believed it. 1% chance, that's all I need.
Still a chance.
That's all I need.
And if you believe you're overtraining or you believe you're not, you're right.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Well, Apolo, man, this has been one of my favorite interviews to date, man. So
Thanks,
thank
man.
you so much, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for the workout.